All right. Welcome to My Sound, a video podcast dedicated to musicians and their unique ideas. Today, I have my good friend Monte Weber. He is a sound artist based in Brooklyn, New York. Me and Monte met at NYU when we were studying composition in the Steinhardt program, and I'm happy to have him on. So, welcome, Monte.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This will be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with kind of the beginning of things. I like to start off with this kind of question. What drew you into music, and can you give a brief overview of how you became to be doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. Early on, so I went to a Waldorf school, which is this private school where they make you like pick a string instrument to play in second grade. So I picked violin. So I started playing violin really early. So that was the first like instrument that I performed on. But then my parents are also musicians, so I grew up in a super musical family. They have like a
Mhm.
samba school. They play Brazilian percussion. They have like a bossa nova band, and they play jazz as well. So I grew up like listening to that and playing percussion as well in that group. Uh, yeah, and then started playing violin. Went to undergrad for music theory and comp in Chicago, and started studying more contemporary composers, and then started to sort of morph into that territory through
Gotcha.
undergrad. Yeah.
And you do a lot of percussion too. Is that just from your parents having
Yeah,
it all around, pretty much?
basically. Yeah. I mean, my dad is also like he's a carpenter, so he built a lot of instruments too, so he just had a lot of instruments around. And
Gotcha.
like the Brazilian percussion ensemble like in a bateria, it's a huge ensemble, right? There's like can be upwards of 20 to 30 percussionists playing. So he had enough instruments because we also used to teach a lot of workshops. Um,
Hmm.
and so we had, you know, enough instruments to supply for like a small middle school, right? So all at
Yeah.
this like warehouse kind of like studio that he had. So yeah, grew up with a ton of things to hit, growing
Right.
up.
And you could just make your own band whenever you wanted to, it sounds
Right,
like. So that's
right.
cool. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. As the audience can see here, we got a synthesizer on one of the screens. We're going to get to that. But before we do, I want to ask you what drew you into the more technological side of music that you ended up pursuing in college, like a lot of us. But what drew you into that?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about this. The first like piece of technology that I got my hands on and got interested in and affected the way that I made music was one of those old like Boss pink loop pedals,
Hmm.
with the two channels. Um, and I was used to like run my violin through it essentially, and I would busk outside of like a cinema
Oh,
in my
dude,
hometown,
you
and
have a
like
job in New York already. Even better,
exactly,
man.
and as people would like get out of the movies, I would like do some very bad like violin loop pedal shit.
Oh
But
man.
because of that, I like had that instrument or I had that piece of gear when I went to undergrad, and so I started once I started to like study more ambient composers and get into more contemporary styles of music. I like just thought about looping in a different way, which was like I think one of the first techniques that I really loved to do was to think about adding looped material both before and after some event. So like let's say if you like start a loop, let's say you like hit record and you leave some space and then you do a musical gesture and then you leave some space after it, right? Now you have like space, gesture, space, and then that whole thing loops. So during the performance, you can then add sound as it comes back around, right?
Hmm.
You can add sound after the thing that you did last time, or you can add things before the thing that you did last time. So you can like fill in the spots in a non-linear way. And
Yeah.
that's like it's funny because obviously like that's what a lot of granular synthesizers do. Like you record into a buffer and then you can pick where
Mm-hmm.
you play back from.
Right.
So in this case I was like in a very analog sense like picking where I wanted to record in the buffer essentially
Oh, that's really
by
interesting.
just waiting.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I was able to like make these like I call them like sonic ecosystems because they seemed very organic and they grew in ways that weren't just like repetitive loops. It felt like you could almost like it was kind of algorithmic, even though it was actually literally just a loop. I was just getting trying to be fancy with how I would add to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that is
yeah.
interesting. I never got into the like looper as a pedal thing, but it seems like usually when that's used, it's just layering one or the other. So I never thought that someone would be giving that space
Right.
to, add a different sound. You said you were able to choose though. So you were able to choose like what section of that entire loop would be played, or did you just kind of have to hear everything every time around? I don't
You would
really know
hear
much
no,
about
yeah, it was
the
very
looper pedal,
rudimentary.
but
You would hear everything every time around, but I'm saying that I would pick and choose like where I wanted to record into because
yeah.
if the loop is, 20 seconds long, I would just wait until 18 seconds into it and just record a sound right at the end.
Hmm.
So it was this very, very like simple way of thinking about looping a little differently, because you hear a lot of people like using loop pedals to just like make a ostinato and then like riff over it, which is essentially what I was doing when I was first playing violin and the loop pedal. I was just like doing a
Hmm.
bunch of modal sounding like,
Yeah.
kind of funny music.
Rising. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
But this was a little bit more meticulous.
Right.
So that was the first like technological, if you could even call it that, like example of me being interested in a piece of technology, what it could offer, and then
Hmm.
how that affected how I would write.
Yeah.
Um,
How old were you when you started doing that, you said?
so that was undergrad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know.
Um,
I had this picture of you busking at like 7 years old and using a looper pedal, and I was like, that's pretty wild. But
well,
okay, so
so
this was
so I did like I
what you
busked when I
did
was pretty
when you used
early
the
or when I
looper.
was young. Yeah. But
Okay.
I was using it in a very sort of
Yeah. More.
normal way. Yeah. And then I brought it with me to college and then like utilized it more as a tool. And then and loops are still like a really big part of what I do now. I mean, you
Right.
really can't get away from it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes even when you can, you don't want to get away from it, depending
Right.
on what you're doing.
Sure,
But
yeah.
so that's also interesting because for anyone out there, Monty also plays guitar, but I didn't know that you were so you were using pedals on the violin before the guitar. That's actually kind of
Yeah.
pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, I
That
didn't
just
really
happened
actually
to be.
play. I didn't play guitar, electric guitar, really until later on. I had all these effect pedals for my violin because I was playing in this wild gypsy punk band called Bella's Bartok at the time, and they were kind of like a go-go bordello uh, influenced band, and so I would like play violin through like distortion pedal and some reverb and stuff, and try to get like guitar tones out of it because I didn't play guitar.
Okay,
Um, yeah. So
gotcha.
I had pedals lying around with me. So I guess yeah, effects pedals were the first like technology that I used, which I think is sort of normal.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I didn't
yeah,
do that, but because I wasn't so into guitar. But yeah, that definitely is usually I think the route just from doing guitar stuff. Okay, so yeah, so I mentioned the modular synthesizer, which is back on, as everyone can see on the other screen. So you're building this. I don't know, all the details. So could you share how that process kind of started and how it has been coming to life for you, and maybe
yeah,
where you're still at with it?
sure. Yeah, so it's fairly recent. I've been like buying modules because you buy modules, individual component parts of the thing, much like effects pedals in a lot of ways, where you can buy multiple effects pedals and then you can run them together, right? So it's the same thing. You're buying individual components that each do a thing. They have a function. So it's been only about a year and a half that I've been like, and I, yeah, um, started off, and I guess the reason for it is I guess going back to that loop pedal like ecosystem idea, I was always really interested in like trying to make a system that I could sound design into or make sound that felt like it kind of had like a life of its own. It had its own sort of agency. I really liked making some things that would set into motion and then sort of sitting back and taking a back seat.
Hmm.
I think like, is it John Cage? One of those guys talked about like removing the ego from composition. This idea of like
Sounds like Cage.
by using chance, yeah, you're taking yourself outside of it, which I really really liked. Um, and I got really into designing systems for making music. And so a lot of the like even contemporary pieces that I would compose were often like box notation or using chance in some way while also maintaining and like keeping to the parts that I wanted to control to actually be notated, you know? So a lot of the time, like I didn't want like totally random pitches. I wanted like random rhythms with a very specific sonority or something. So
Hmm.
the modular synth is like really good at a lot of those like stochastic and like random processes. And I'll show you in a second. It's also really good for like making something sound cohesive, I guess, like because you can tie and have different voices really communicating with each other. Um, so like if you think about simple things um, like envelopes, like you know volume envelopes, like how loud sound A is. Uh, you can easily make the loudness of sound A be tied to the loudness of sound B, and so when A plays, B also plays, and they sound like they're playing together in that way. So it has this like ensemble feel to it. Um, so this patch that I'll show you in a sec like has a bunch of synth voices that are kind of running. I set it up like today, so it's it is what it is. But they're running, you know, they're like playing within a sonority, but their volume will start to like react to the live impulse of the drum samples that are also playing. So like, you know, like sidechain compression that they use in a lot of like pop productions where the kick drum will like duck away the sound of the bass or the sound of the synth, so it actually like carves out space for that kick. This is the opposite, where like every time the kick plays, the synths also play.
Right.
So the whole thing is like moving together to a certain degree.
Right.
Um,
Okay. Nice.
and I liked those kinds of processes, and that's why it feels like modular synth is really good at those kinds of things, like connecting things to other things, essentially.
Yeah. Like
Um,
you said, there's a built-in cohesion, which
yeah,
when you're just diving in on a laptop can be a challenge right up front. If you're
Y-
using a ton of different sounds or another kind of any other
yeah,
approach really. So
and like setting up loops and like repetitive rhythms and things like that are obviously you can do it in a DAW, but you have to like set your looping marker thing, right? And then if you want to it's just yeah, it's a very different feel to work in a DAW than to work on a modular synth. It's also I just like knobs and it
yeah,
feels really great to patch things together, you know.
for sure. Yeah, and it sounds like you get more out of the process of how it's used rather than the sounds specifically that are produced. I mean, you're obviously
Hmm.
interested in that, but it sounds like the process of getting to your composition is vastly different using a modular synth than a DAW.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
and
All
and
right.
since and since I've been like developing the instrument, it's I keep pointing over here because it is right there in the studio, but um, I haven't really integrated it that much into like my DAW based music production yet. It's really been its own separate thing. Like everything I've made on it that I've used for sound installations or something else, I made a patch and I just recorded the output of it, and that was the final thing. I never actually made parts and then worked in the studio to add other parts to it so far.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so that's sort of what I think is going to come eventually. Um, but there needs to be some better like studio integration, and I need better MIDI communication between my computer and the synth over there, so that things can be quantized and be in sync better. You
Right.
know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um, yeah.
All right. Well, do you want to share something on it now, or
Yeah. Sure.
I don't know if you want to
Um,
play it? Yeah.
yeah, I can play some. Let me see. Let me jump over to
Or
this
you just talk about it. Yeah, whatever you want.
camera. Yeah. Cool. Let me know if you can hear me again. on this
Yeah.
mic. Cool.
Yep. You're good.
And then you can kind of see a little bit. So if I like point over here, you can kind of see stuff. Great.
Yeah, we can
Um,
definitely see your hand.
yeah. So as you can see, I mean, how in depth? I guess we should have talked about this before, but who is your audience, Brian, for
Yeah.
these things?
All the experimental electronic musicians out there. So I mean, you could give a couple basics, but yeah, if you want to kind of deep dive into some interesting components that are maybe unique to your
Okay.
machine, go for it.
Okay. Cool. Um, yeah, I'll just like briefly run through what's happening. So there's like a couple of voices, meaning like synth voices that you can hear. So if I go like this, let me know if that's a decent volume for me to talk over. Is that
Hmm.
okay? Does that sound fine?
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so this thing is basically this little module over here is making some sound. There's kind of a percussion thing as well that's making some sound.
Hmm.
And everything's happening at the same time, essentially, right?
Hmm.
Um, running through some delay and stuff. I have control over some variety of the rhythms. So what will basically happen is the sound of that is running through what I was talking about before. This I have these VCAs over here. I don't know if you can see voltage
Yeah, no, I can see
controlled
that.
amplifier. So everything on your rack is VC, meaning voltage controlled. So these amplifiers, all these um, synth voices are running through their own amplifiers. And I have some drum loops that you didn't hear, which is every time the drums attack or make a sound, it's giving me a range of voltages depending on how loud they are. And that is basically triggering, opening up the volume gate of those synth voices. So actually, we're hearing the rhythm of the drums right now without, because I've muted those voices. So when I
Hmm.
bring them in,
Mm.
I'll mute that
Hmm.
again. So without them there, it kind of feels like angular and stabby. But once you have that actual drum loop,
Yeah, it's right there tied in.
so that's just the drums by themselves. Um, yeah.
Nice.
So that's the kind of the idea. I mean, meet this idea of that
Hmm.
patch. It's pretty simple. It's just I really liked like the grooviness and that sort of tight knit compositional ideas of having these all of these sounds all be like governed by sort of the same rules, which is that when the drums play, I play essentially.
Hmm.
Um, which, and this was the thing. It's like, when I was, I'll come back over here.
Hmm.
When I was like writing pieces for an ensemble for like new music, groups and stuff. One of the, not to like name any names or whatever, but one of the things that they were the worst at were rhythm. Like rhythm is hard, folks.
Yeah.
It's really hard to play in time, especially something like that that's that precise and really needs to be precise, and that's why it works. Um,
Yeah.
so when I was trying to like, and I, fell in love with like post minimalism and had
Hmm.
tried to write these pieces that I just was constantly frustrated with the performance
Hmm.
of because it was it was not good.
Yeah, well, and sometimes when you have those, even if it's like a simpler rhythm, but it's kind of, yeah, if it's any kind of angular thing that needs to be precise, some of those groups were better off just doing the like free range rhythm thing where you can't really know if it's in time, and that's just totally different than having to
Right.
play
A
a
groove.
precise groove down. Yeah.
Totally. And also
Yeah,
grooves are grooves are
they're
hard.
hard. Yeah.
Grooves, especially certain kinds of grooves, like very non-idiomatic to a certain degree. A lot of the players, stereotypically who are playing in ensembles didn't grow up playing like funk,
Rhythm. Yeah.
necessarily,
Right.
right? So it's like they don't feel that groove, and feel is
Hmm.
huge, and it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to
Especially
learn
for
that.
funk. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. Uh, so I've just the modular synth for me is just like I'm able to do a lot of the things that I always wanted to do now. Um, but
Yeah,
I'm
because you're
just
able to.
alone doing it, so that's the thing.
Yeah. But yeah, so you like it because it can kind of it's got this like I don't know if it's like a homophonic kind of quality or something. Like you're able to like attach all your melodies or a lot of your melodies more like kind of glue them to the rhythm you're saying, and that's kind of
Yeah.
something that you enjoy doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean,
Okay.
and obviously it can do a whole bunch of things. I mean, a lot of the patches that I made for these like sort of ambient sound installations were just like sort of very Brian Eno-esque, like 4 to 5 point, counterpoint, just textures. So the modular synth can do that really well too, because like you set up some module to be your master clock, and then essentially you can have multiples of a pulse. So I mean, this
Yeah.
patch has a pulse. It's at 75, BPM, and it's everything's on that pulse. Um, and because of that, because of being able to have a pulse and be so precise with how far off that pulse you are, if that makes sense. Like, I could have like, uh, you know, like half note triplets like really easily, and that's very hard to do live,
Oh, yeah.
but this
So
will do it perfectly. And so like really really interesting to play with rhythm. It's very very fun for generating rhythms.
okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't know you looked at it so much as like your personal ensemble, but that kind of makes sense with
Yeah.
the multiple voices and everything that it can do. So yeah, and it sounds like you can get those polyrhythms that it sounds like you were either kind of introduced and excited about from your parents, or more like the minimalist music, or just really both, or
Both, yeah. I
yeah.
mean, samba is polyrhythms, and everybody
Mhm.
plays this very simple part themselves, but all their parts interlock to make, the essential, like the beat and the whole rhythm. It's the same with African rhythms, and I mean, so yeah, that rhythm and those kinds of polyrhythms were always really important. I
Yeah.
think, yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting. We both kind of have a little bit of that because yeah, growing up playing drums, and I got it more from the progressive rock thing, which you had drummers that were really probably just getting bored and exploring. Like
right,
they didn't want to do the basic backbeats, like Bill Bruford of King Crimson or Danny Carey of Tool, those kind of people. So yeah, we both that's interesting. We both had an interest in polyrhythm because I kind of just came to college and was like that's kind of all I knew. So it's just kind of like this is the greatest thing. It's like oh yeah, there's all this other stuff that
yeah.
people care about and they don't know anything about polyrhythms or care. But anywho, cool. Well, all right. So yeah, is there anything else you want to share before we jump to something else? Anything on that modular synth that I don't know, maybe
Um,
that's kind of specific to it, or maybe not. I don't know.
right. I don't think. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot, but we'll do another
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
deep
yeah.
dive. I
No, I
can,
just
yeah.
cool. Yeah, I didn't know
Um,
if we were missing anything or something.
no, I think that's good.
Um, okay. So yeah, so you're active in what I call the sound installation world, which I feel is a pretty niche field. But I'm curious to hear more about it. So how did you get into that? And as far as like work goes, what kind of people are looking for that? Because I know you've been actively working in that.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I wish I knew of more people who are working in that field, because then I would
Yeah.
have more jobs. But um, so I got into it through doing work with immersive theater and like theater basically, in some ways. So there's a great theater company. I'll do a shout out to Linked Dance Theater.
Yeah.
They're a New York based dance theater company. I started working with them when I first sort of moved to New York pretty early on. I met those guys, and they do immersive theater. So the pieces that they're making are site specific, which often means that the sound and the sound design and things is like integrated within the space fairly well. And so one of the first projects that we did was this that I did that relates to this is this was this uh, it was a show, but it wind up from my perspective, it was like a 10 room sound installation, multi channel, that was basically like running sound through the whole show. So when the actors would like walk into one room, there'd be specific sound design in that room, and when they walked into a different room, there'd be sound in that room.
What was this, the one with the was it the Alzheimer's
Yeah, that was the
show?
one on
Okay.
Governor's Island. Yep.
I think that was the first one I saw, actually. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
remember that.
that was the first like major like build that I had to do. That was like over 20 channels of separate audio, physically running speaker wire from this like closet with three like a bunch of amplifiers and two audio interfaces that were 10 channels each.
Hmm.
Because it's not running the same sound to all the rooms. It's every room has separate sound. Um, and then there were some interactive features, like one of the rooms had like a microphone that people could record into, uh, and then would get played back like later on in the show. So there was essentially like a
Hmm.
delay of like 10
10 minutes.
minutes, yeah, or something like that. Yeah. So like coming up with like simple solutions that kind of like feel magical and are interesting, are
Yeah.
really cool. There was like actually exact same concept. So here we go. Envelopes. So
Hmm.
VCAs. I used a contact microphone essentially on the back of like a a piece of canvas. There was a scene where somebody would paint on this canvas. So I put a contact mic on the back of the canvas so that when you like scraped the brush on the canvas, it would make sound, but all that would do is it would uh, make a volume which then synth tones and music would be that same volume. So there'd be no sound if you didn't touch the brush to the canvas, but when you made sound on the canvas, you didn't hear that sound that you made, but you heard now ambient sound design like fade into the room. So it's like you're able to like paint sound was the sort of the concept. That was the homework
Hmm.
assignment. And that's the same concept that I just showed in this modular synth. It's just a VCA and an envelope where you're
Hmm.
taking the volume of one thing and you're not actually using that volume. You're making this other thing be that volume. If that is
Hmm.
really confusing or makes sense, yeah,
No, it seems to make sense.
yeah,
Obviously, a different result here with,
totally different, yeah,
but similar. Yeah, similar concept.
yeah.
Okay,
So that was
cool.
the first. That was the first one, and then done some other like kind of like pieces of music that were quasi performance slash quasi sound installations that were like long form performances. And then the most recent was this this series of sound installations for a boutique hotel in Rhinebeck, New York. They commissioned me to make five like interactive sound sculptures, essentially that like lived outside on the grounds of this property that guests could discover, essentially like discover as they're walking around. So there was like a grand piano that lives outside that plays sound on its own, a phone booth that you can go inside and pick up the phone and like hear music out of the phone, and it's immersed. It's in the phone booth. There was like a bus stop, like a bus bench with a bus sign, and a few others.
Okay.
Um,
You
and
don't have
that's
any
the
pictures of
most
that, do you?
recent. I forgot.
Yeah, yeah, we didn't catch that.
It's on my Instagram. If you
I
guys go
know.
to my
We'll
Instagram,
throw it up on
we'll
the
throw some links.
description, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, and that
Okay.
was it's the same thing. That was like I do it hardwired. I didn't do wireless technology, so it's like laptops in a safe environment, like inside with amplifiers, and then running hundreds and hundreds of feet of outdoor speaker wire, which was not. I don't recommend. But the
It's still
thing
probably
about
easier than the wireless.
well, and the thing is like when it hooks up and works, it just works. Like it doesn't drop
Right.
out. It's
Hmm.
really hard to have that go wrong. I mean, the only reason that the installation should not be working is if they turn the installation off.
Right.
But that's not on me. So, if it's wired, it works. Like that's
Yeah,
really kind of a thing. So
safer.
it's safer. And it turns out that you can wire many, many feet of speaker wire. Like from my research and things, they say you shouldn't go more than this amount of feet, and the speaker wire gauge has to be this thick, and that's sort of all true within a certain degree. But there were speaker runs of 400 feet, and it was fine.
Oh,
It sounded fine, which is I was really surprised by. So
okay.
yeah,
Cool. Yeah, and that's your most recent, right?
yeah,
Um,
and that. I mean, I don't know if you want to jump. If we have time to jump into some of the Max MSP stuff, but that's basically that
yeah.
was my like world that I get into post violin loop pedal stuff
Mm-hmm.
and pre-modular synth. So as
Mm-hmm.
I was getting out of undergrad and going to graduate school at NYU, I started to get into Max MSP. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
then yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna mention if you want to, yeah, if you want to throw that patch on,
Mhm.
this is the one for your installation. Is that on
Yeah.
there already? Okay, so there we go.
All right. So you
Mm-hmm.
can see this thing that says the forgotten piano. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So yeah, I worked with another composer, guy that we both went to NYU with, Brendan. He also wrote some of the music for this because our task was making like hours of music essentially, because this art installation ran all day long. So and what this Max patch does. Well, should I talk about what Max is a little bit or?
Yeah, why don't you just give like a little
Okay.
brief overview, just in case anybody unaware.
So it's very similar to the modular synth world actually in a lot of ways in that like when you start um, a new patch it's blank like it looks like this and there's nothing there. And in order to do anything with the program you have to like make objects that do things. So like if I wanted to make a sine tone generator, I would make this object and patch it to this volume slider and then make an output and then attach that. So because of that, it's really, really good for um, doing whatever the hell you want to do with
Pretty much.
stuff, essentially. Like, so in this case, it's for me, it's been such a great tool to be like, okay, I cannot do this in Ableton. It just doesn't want me to work this way. Like most softwares tell you how they want to be used, um, because there's an analogy for why they were made to begin with, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
DAWs are an analogy to like tape manipulation, essentially, right? You cut tape and you splice, and it's all emulating like a mixer and a tape machine, essentially. So Max is not that; it's just this open environment. So what I was able to do is this is just for the piano installation. So I had a couple of different Max patches, and another one has like this same idea for the phone booth and the bus stop. But this one that we're looking at is just the piano. And what it does is each of these orbs represent a different sound file. And at different times of the day, we hear different sound files. So it's actually, and there's a clock, right, that's always running. And so automatically attached to this clock is just the concept that like, and I made the changes happen every hour. So on the hour, you get a new sort of sound design and like program change. And it transitions during around sunset to being into these like night music sounds that work more or work better at night. And then at 2 a.m., the whole installation will slowly turn off, and the power strip that are running the amplifiers is also on a timer, so the power strip shuts off and the amplifiers don't overheat overnight and they can cool down and then start up again in
Oh,
the morning, in which case this sound design starts up again during the sunrise musical cue. So the whole thing is just like running over to a 24-hour period, and going through all these sound design changes. So essentially like it goes like this. It starts to slowly move. Here, I can turn this on. Um, I can't hear this, but you can hear that, I
mm-hmm.
think.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, this is at the first hour. So this would be at clock triggers. Let's look in here. 8 a.m. is the first one. So at 8 a.m., it starts to move from this sound file very slowly over to, I believe, this sound file over the course of, I think, like 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, and I see the Venn diagram overlap there. Does that mean that it's fading in, fading out, kind of like a DJ set almost?
Yeah, exactly.
A
So
little
when the
bit.
when it's in the middle, it's actually playing both of them at the same time. So like we were composing within similar sonorities so that all these kind of blend. It actually worked out
Mhm.
really well. It worked out easier, better than I thought it would without having to think about it that much. Because
Okay.
the music's very kind of ambient. Um,
Hmm.
and so yeah, this is sort of slowly floating over this way. Um,
Okay.
and yeah, so every hour it makes these different transitions. It will automatically make these slow transitions. It looks like it's not even moving because it's going so slow right now. Um, But
Oh, is it
yes,
that cursor? Is that what we're following? Is that
yeah, this is
cursor?
like where this
Okay.
cursor is basically the volume. So when the cursor's in the middle of a sphere, it's at full volume, and as it moves to the
Right.
outside, it gets towards zero.
Mm-hmm.
The volumes of which, let's see, let me go back to here. Um, are right here. So one is full volume. So this is slowly fading down
Mm-hmm.
towards zero, which will be no volume, and it will move this way. Um,
Right.
so I had to just like map out all these paths. But the logic, the some of the coding in Max MSP is really interesting. You're dealing with milliseconds always, which is very annoying, and you're saying go from half volume to zero point 0.2 volume, which is pretty quiet, in 300,000 milliseconds, right? That's
Yeah,
like
I
what
guess
this,
knowing probably when you're with
yeah,
high amounts of time, I'm
yeah.
guessing.
So that's like you're constantly sort of coding in milliseconds, but you can be so precise, right? And like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure how I would do this patch, make this happen in Ableton automatically like this. Like, I don't think it's possible. Um, you can of course
Mm-hmm.
make a Max for Live patch, and then, but that's like
Right. If you're
why do
using
that?
Max, yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So
Cool.
so using Max to like build worlds again, and then sort of govern how sound operates within that world. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
and
cool.
yeah,
Very, very Cajun. I feel like kind of in those or Satie had I think it was what is it, vertices or I can't remember what it is, but it's one of those pieces that goes on for years and years. So you could,
right.
I'm sure there's Max developers that have already planted those somewhere, the piece that will take 20 years to hear the
Sure,
whole thing or something.
sure, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
probably.
that's very
Um,
cool. Yeah.
and I mean, as
I
far
didn't
as I know, it's still been here. I'll stop sharing. It's still operating. Like,
mm-hmm.
it's been up since I don't remember, May, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
or April. I think
And they
May.
kept it up. They kept it going and
As far as I
working
know,
good.
I mean,
Okay.
it's also one of those odd things where it's like I have no control over it anymore. Like,
Yeah, that's interesting.
it's that's something that I'm coming to terms with. I think, like, between you and me and the people whoever watches this, like, uh, yeah, I mean, it's like, oh, when you make a piece of music for a concert, like, you're in control of the performance of that thing, right? But like, once you make an
To a
art
degree.
installation, yeah, to a degree, once you make an art installation, usually like the museum or whatever will like have it up for a time, and like there's understandings for how that installation should be treated in terms of
Mm-hmm.
just respect, and when it should be turned on, and if it turns off, that they fix it immediately so that it doesn't just like sit there derelict or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
and this is sort of a different situation because this was very like, it's almost in some ways felt a bit like I'm building them a porch that they can use, and then once my job's done, I'm just done with it, right? I have like no more real like interaction with that thing. Um, so as far as I know, I think it's still running fine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that if it had some major, issue, they'd call me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's an
Right.
interesting thing.
All
It
right.
kind of exists. I don't know how long it'll be up for, but it's just sort of
Yeah.
theirs now. They
Good.
own it. Yeah.
So for the audience, if they want to check it out, where do they exactly go? If they're in this area, the New York area.
Yeah, so it's in Rhinebeck, New York.
Oh yeah, Rhinebeck.
It's at a hotel called Habitas on the Hudson. It's a
Okay.
beautiful hotel. It's a really expensive hotel. It's very, very beautiful, but it's outside. So if you're driving through Rhinebeck, yeah, drive by,
Check it out.
see if it's still on, and let me know
Okay.
if
Cool.
it's
We'll
still
put
running.
like a link to it. Is there if there's something we can throw on for that
Hmm.
so they can find it. Do you all right, so with the sound installations, have you thought of doing anything? This would probably be more for your own fun, but have you tried to work in your electronic stuff or any of this modular synth stuff and then throwing that in some way with the Max or the sound
Right.
installation world, or is that just on the horizon, just haven't got to it, or is it something you're just like whatever about?
I haven't. Yeah, I mean the art installation world, which is really like the only real difference, is that it's like it sort of exists on its own, and it's temporally longer form, I guess, than some of my other pieces, because it does its thing and it exists there. in space. So I haven't combined the concepts, but a lot of the like a lot of the theories and concepts behind some of that Max patch that I just showed you and things I did were involved in I've built like Max MSP instruments, and that was that like the joystick instrument that I was using for a while
Hmm.
in Max MSP, and that was, I guess it's not. I mean, I wouldn't say it's like related in concept to art installations, but
Isn't.
it's Max MSP, yeah.
Yeah, it's for your
Um,
own. Do you? Oh yeah. Do you want to share that? That's actually kind of interesting, and maybe just quickly talk about that. The joystick you developed, was
yeah,
that at
sure.
IRCAM? Was
Yes.
that also at
So
IRCAM?
yeah.
Okay.
So when I was at did my master's at NYU, I did a semester at IRCAM, and developed. So this is, remember, this is before I got into modular. So I was like looking for the answers to like making a composition environment that I liked. So I tried to do it in Max MSP, and I at that time I was a little bit more interested in like this physicality of performance, having it be very performable. And so I gravitated towards like controllers. This is a joystick, and then
Hmm.
there's another joystick that I have here. It's a bigger one, which has like a tilt this way, like a Z rotation. So it's like X, Y, and Z, this back and forth like that. And then a bunch of buttons, and another controller that's like a little breath controller. So it's like this little USB device that gives a range of values when you blow into this hose and you attach it to it, of 0 to 127. It's just MIDI. So
Hmm.
you blow in. Um, and then I was using like this old uh, Wacom tablet, one of those like drawing tablets, uh,
Mm.
and had all four of those devices and basically patched all the control of those things to parameters in Mac. So I was able to like make sound happen when I wanted by buttons on the joystick. So like uh, the triggers were like my gate triggers essentially. And then I could like start a sound, and then I could like freeze that sound in a delay or like a granular processor, and then I could like manipulate the time with the joystick. So it was all very immediate. Um,
Hmm.
and I was
Do you
doing
want?
for a while. I was doing like performances on that thing. Do you want me to show a little bit of that
Yeah, yeah.
instrument, or
Let's
yeah,
show it so we put
yeah?
the picture to the
Let's see,
description.
share screen, share that. Okay,
Okay, let's see.
so
So I'm
this,
gonna. Yeah, why don't you play that there?
yeah.
Is this in France?
No, this was at Abrons Art Center in New York City.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Yeah, Abrons. Okay.
So the pen could control the spatializations of where the sound was. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I did performances like in quad or like 8-point, which is super fun. So you could really like spin the sound around the room.
Mm-hmm.
See if I can skip ahead.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think eventually there's. So there does wind up being some actual sound, more like harmonic stuff. Which which I think if I can remember correctly, I think the pen, I think I mapped on the x-axis essentially just like a scale or like a, locations where if the pen was at that location, the ambient pad of tones sort of got transposed. So
Hmm.
that was how I could sort of like change the pitch. I think. I think another patch that I had, it was how hard I blew on the breath controller too, which always reminded me of like how wind instruments work, like overblowing
Hmm.
multiphonics or how overblowing the overtone series on a wind instrument, which is like that's what I
Hmm.
always yeah, when I was designing this instrument at IRCAM, it was like how do I make a electronic instrument feel real and be related to some of those basic principles of physics, which is that like if you blow really hard on a wind instrument, if you overblow, you can get sharper, right? Or if you
Hmm.
underblow, especially in the lower register for some instruments, you get flat. So like coding those things into my instrument automatically made it so that when I got really into the performance and I just got really into it and I blew hard, it would actually start to get a little sharp, and that really helped me like feel connected and make music that felt more organic, even though because the sounds were so industrial and so non-organic, I guess. So
Hmm.
always trying to remember those sort of like basic principles of how actual instruments
Excellent.
work. Yeah.
And you wanted to stick to that. You didn't want to like have like the filter go up or something if you blew harder and have it slow down or something. Like you could have
Well,
probably done
there
anything,
were
right?
some of that. Yeah, I mean there
Okay.
was, and that became the art of it. And I think that that's sort of a big issue, not issue, but that's what I excites me about some artists, like or some artists that I saw versus some that I didn't like what they were doing. It was like they clearly didn't seem like they thought about those things, and like because you could map anything to anything, you might as well just map anything to anything, and there was no rhyme or reason to it, and it didn't feel like I could um, connect with it. Like
Hmm.
to keep some of these things organic because it's already so
Hmm.
out there
Out
in
there,
some ways. It felt like, you know, um,
trying to
just
retain that
yeah,
familiarity in some
yeah.
way.
I think so. It's certainly helped me perform on it too. Like
Okay.
then at least I'm not totally learning this entirely new instrument that's counterintuitive. I just didn't want to make something counterintuitive. I wanted to make it idiomatic for whatever that's worth on a new
On a,
instrument that doesn't really
yeah.
exist,
Right.
But
Yeah. I don't know if idiomatic.
yeah,
Yeah.
not
If
really.
it
That
exists.
doesn't really
Yeah.
apply.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying
Yeah.
though. Cool. All right. So I think I'm gonna jump into a little bit about your project Metno, which
Cool.
for
Yeah.
those out there is Monty's kind of primary solo electronic project, you'd say, right?
Yeah.
This is your moniker you've been under since I don't know 2019 or so. Was that right?
Yeah, I think so. That
2020?
sounds about
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Um, so I was gonna say that listening to it, it has this unique blend of minimalist textures and also kind of this what I would call like almost like ambient retro wave kind of thing. I don't know if that's what the kids would call it, but that's what I call it. So was any of that album generated on the modular synth at that point, or is this all in like Logic? I think you're
It was
saying,
all yeah, it
or
was all
okay,
Logic, and it also wasn't Max MSP either. It was a total just like studio
right,
composition DAW based
soft
album.
synth kind of thing.
It was a
Okay.
lot of soft synths. I was like, I don't even remember what I had in terms of hardware since at the time. But yeah, I teach electronic music at Montclair State University, and I made the record over a fall semester because I was trying to like make some demos of some techniques that I was going to teach, and it wound up just
Oh,
like a
interesting.
lot of those demos like turned into tracks basically, and
Right.
so it really came together. And then like it's funny, and then I've sat down to try to make records since then, and just like it's been hard. So it's wild that
Hmm.
just sort of like
That
came
just came
out
out
within like
easily.
three
Yeah.
months, and then now I'd like to jump back in maybe this winter and try that again now that I have some space and some different tools at my disposal. But yeah, that was just a lot of Arturia software synths and like battery drums and like contact instruments, like
Okay.
everything in the box. Yeah.
You can make a new set of demos for the class, and maybe you'll have a new album
Yeah.
out of it.
Right. Right. Hopefully.
That's what yeah. Cool. Okay. All right. So yeah, I was gonna ask about the Max. You said that there wasn't really any Max in that. Well, this is kind of more just in general and related to you as an artist, composer, that I like to kind of ask people because I'm just kind of curious. How much planning kind of goes into your music? Obviously, with some of these patches, it seems like some decent amount has to, especially with like your modular synth. Obviously, that's a huge, obviously, step by step planning kind of thing. But do you plan a lot when you write something new? Are there any goals, or do you mostly just arrive at things more intuitively as you compose or write?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know it might seem like it's very, I mean, okay, well, I guess it sort of depends. Like for the sound installation stuff, like I had a concept for how I needed that to work, how I needed it to work. So then I
Mm-hmm.
had to make the Max patch to actually do what I wanted. So that's like using Max as like a utility, it needs to function in that way. But like this patch that I made earlier today, um, I just like the sound of those drum loops. I like started that way and started patching. It often, for me, it feels like when I'm patching, I'm like pulling things out of the instrument, if that makes sense, even though I'm plugging things in. But it feels like I don't know, it feels very sculpturing, like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm molding clay, even though you actually start with nothing. You start with the infinite possibility of a lot of different things, right? So, um, yeah, I mean, I usually have a loose concept. Like I wanted to make a cohesive idea where drums and the synth voices were like connected. But that was basically it, um,
Mm-hmm.
for this patch. And like,
Okay.
and then now if I was to like continue patching this, I would be like, okay, so what does it do? It's pretty percussive. Like, am I able to now like make something ambient? Can I turn this piece like, because if I was going to play this live, it might get old after maybe not that long. So like, how can
Mm-hmm.
I pull other sound worlds out of this? And that might require some planning before I start patching or depatching. But
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, I work very intuitively, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Especially in like DAWs. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like I will just start with loops and then layer and then improvise and then like
Mm-hmm.
something or don't like something. I really don't have form or anything in mind ever these
Mm-hmm.
days.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, I tend to kind of sometimes think about form, but know that at this point in my life, it's gonna probably veer off in some way that I didn't anticipate. So,
right.
cool. Um, okay. So, is there anything that you kind of hope to explore in the coming years that you're not doing at this point, or something that you see down the line that you hope to get around to doing, that you just haven't found the time for yet?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. It's the reason that I do so many
Hmm.
things. I mean, like, and there's
Yeah.
also like the indie band that I'm in too. Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
um,
Rely, Tom,
yeah,
for
I'll
those
send a link.
listening. Yeah,
I'll
we'll
put a
put
link
them on
there
there.
too. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know. I just really, yeah, I really enjoy making music in a lot of different capacities and themes weave their way through all of it. I really think the more I look back, this is why this was really fun because I was thinking about like my journey and I was like, oh
Hmm.
wow, like I've really been kind of doing the same thing in a lot of ways, but been doing the same like concepts or themes my
Hmm.
whole like basically for the past 15 years, but with
It
different
evolved.
instruments and
Yeah.
different. So that's cool. That definitely feels like I know what I like doing, I guess, to a certain degree. Um,
Hmm.
but I'd like to be able to perform on the modular synth out. I love performing live. That was why that control instrument with the joysticks was so fun because it really got me performing. I pretty much only performed on that instrument. I never made any recordings of it really. It was just for me to perform out live. So I like to
Hmm.
get back into performing my metronome
Yeah.
music live somehow. I still haven't really
Yeah.
figured out how to do it. Modular
It's
synth is
hard.
like it's a very hard tool. It
Yeah.
does it's the analog
It's just,
VCOs are not you can't I mean you can tune them, you have to tune them, right? So it's just hard. I haven't been able to figure that out yet. So I think that's
yeah, it's
maybe what I'll
difficult.
focus on.
Yeah, and for those listening as well, Monty was performing in my group for a while, kind of performing. And yeah, it's tricky for a lot of reasons. I mean, apart just from the technical side, it's kind of like you have these sounds that you like, and I listen in headphones and enjoy them, and then in live it sometimes gets dispersed or whatever, or it translates in a way that I wasn't. Sometimes I was more excited, but sometimes it was translating less so
Yeah.
in a live thing. So there's that whole aspect too, where it's like, oh, we're in a live space, and maybe these sounds aren't getting across the same way that you would think. So it's a real challenge, especially when that's not the kind of norm. There already is many established norms that you can jump into, but live electronic music in this kind of way, at least, apart from the EDM kind of DJ thing, is always kind of you're kind of making your own road there. You're kind of
Yeah, it's really
having to.
hard. Yeah, it's really hard to
Yeah.
mix for like I started recently mixing for like when I did have a gig, which are seldom, uh I have like been starting to rent rehearsal spaces at like Pirate and
Hmm.
remixing my music for those shitty PA speakers
Oh,
because
yeah.
uh I mean,
Yeah, you
it's
don't know
it's
how it's
it's
gonna
it's not
sound.
going to be what I want, but at least I can control how it will sound at the gig a little bit more, and
Hmm.
that does make a difference. I think it's
Yeah.
what a great, some people in the like, yeah, have told me to do that, and it's helped, especially with backing tracks for like my band too, because that's something that we're
Hmm.
primarily playing at venues, and the PA
Making sure
speakers are
those are
all
heard
pretty
and
much
everything.
the same at a certain level, like you have like it's all like a QSC like thing with two subs and whatever. So knowing how it will sound on that is the
Cool.
least you can do, I
Yeah.
guess. I mean, or the most you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And you probably figure out at this point kind of which layers to bring up or down or that sort of thing. And that kind of
Yeah, yeah,
mostly runs consistent across most of your venues.
I think so.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah. Cool. Disney move. So I was gonna ask, oh yeah, this is kind of a little getting into more recent affair.
yeah,
So AI, have you we were talking about this just the other day.
yeah.
Have you been interested in this at all, exploring it there, and not just music, because I've actually found myself really interested in some of the visual stuff, but have you what's your take on it first off? Are you kind of like, oh, I'm excited where this is going? Are you someone that's going, oh shit, this is going to take any job that I would have? Yeah, what's your general take on that?
A little bit of both. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by it. I think it's interesting. Um, I like that it can be a tool. I haven't used it as a tool yet, apart from the visual things, because that's something that I cannot do myself at all. So yeah, it's wonderful. Like make some album artwork. Like that's
Hmm.
great. I get that. Like 5 years ago, I would have asked a friend to make it and pay them. So now that I can do it myself, it's good. It's bad for them. And
Hmm.
so for me right now, there's not things that I'm seeing the AI that's doing that I'm can't do. Like I haven't lost
Music wise.
yeah, I haven't lost jobs to it. I don't think I've definitely lost jobs to like just sample libraries that are cheaper and
Yeah.
like clients
At
not
this
really
point, that's still,
caring. But that's
yeah,
old. I mean that we've been
right.
losing jobs to that. And somebody actually made that track, so like they get
Yeah,
I mean
someone's getting
that's good
paid
for
for
them.
it.
But
Yeah.
um so but I mean ChatGPT is cool because of its ability to code. And that's where I
Mm.
think is really interesting. Like I have a good friend who uh is using ChatGPT to code for him because he does all these like custom scripts and stuff for Ableton. He has this crazy rig where he integrates Ableton and like I forget what coding language he's actually asking ChatGPT to code in, but basically he's saying, ChatGPT, I want to be able to do this. Write me code, and then ChatGPT will do it, and then he'll run the code and it won't work, and he'll get an error message, and he'll tell
Tweak it.
ChatGPT what the error message is, and eventually over time it will code for him,
Wow.
which is and that's amazing. I mean, like
Yeah.
I've asked it to make me Max MSP patches, and it can do it okay. It's not great. They don't run, but I can see uh, that it's definitely better at it than I was when I started, like by a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like definitely taken some classes. It's took a whole master's degree in Max MSP probably.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
pretty
Yeah,
good.
I didn't
Yeah.
even think of that end of it, using it. I mean, I guess I knew it using for coding purposes, but so you can use it for Max too. Would you just
Yeah.
ask it what what's what objects you need to put in there, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
and it will tell you what objects, but it won't sometimes, and it will even um, export like the actual like code, because in Max
Mm.
MSP you can like copy your patch
Oh,
in a
okay.
code I forget, and then you can paste it.
And then
Like
it'll
like
make
I
all the
yeah, so I could
appropriate
like
objects.
I could email you like the code for my patch, and you could paste it into a new patch, and it would open.
Okay.
When I pasted the Chat GPT patches, they never worked at all.
Mm.
But when but the objects looked good on paper, so I'm not sure. It might have been user error on my end. I'm not
Mm.
sure.
Interesting.
Um, yeah,
Okay.
it was cool. I mean, it's cool, especially. I mean, I think it'll be interesting for like Arduino and like Raspberry Pi, because that's something that it always comes up in like sound installation work. I've always avoided it because I don't know how to code well in those
Hmm.
languages. But if ChatGPT can help me make some Arduino codes
Then
and
AI is
get that
making
to work,
jobs.
then that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Cool.
exactly. Yeah,
Cool. Awesome. Well, we're about to wrap it up here, but I like to end with any exciting music you're listening to, and this does not have to be brand new music necessarily. Just is there
yeah.
anything what's in your Discman these days?
Yeah, so I just, I mean, this is probably an old band, and you probably will know it because you seem to know these kinds of bands. But the band's called The Clientele. I think they've been around
Um,
forever, but they just came out with an album that's amazing, and I haven't like heard an album in a while that I've listened to all the way through,
hmm.
and really liked it and really enjoyed it. And I'll send you a link to it as well. I'm totally blanking on the name. I think
Okay.
it's called "I'm Not There, I'm Not Here Anymore" or "I'm Not There Anymore" by The Clientele.
Clientele.
Yeah,
No, I never heard of them. Are they like the Replacements? I don't know. That's what it reminded me of. They're kind of like
I think they're. I'm not even gonna
which
say
is
because I
probably
just
even older.
discovered them. I
Okay.
don't know their like background.
Okay.
I think they've been around since like their first album was like 1991 or something like that, 93.
Okay.
So they've been
So not
making
as old
music
as the
for a
Replacements,
while.
but
Yeah,
okay. Okay, the Clientele. So that's your pick.
yeah.
Okay.
Um, they're
Cool.
kind of
We'll throw
like
them
they
out there.
remind me of like Pentangle, the band Pentangle, a bit,
Mm.
which I love. And then like listen
Pentangle.
to Calvin Harris a bit too, because
Mm-hmm.
it's just
Keep
good
up with that.
production.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah. Cool.
Yeah,
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. Monty,
cool.
thanks for joining us. You shared yeah, a lot of interesting stuff here since the Mac stuff. So yeah, thanks for coming on, and maybe we'll catch up and do this again.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks again for having me. This was a blast. I'll send you all those links. So cool.
Absolutely. All right. I'll see you.
All right.